In this video, I'll be showing you how to exploit an SSRF vulnerability automatically using Python. Now, in this case, and in many cases with server-side request forgery, you're actually able to port scan, and that is the specific use case we're going to use for exploiting this SRF vulnerability. And another thing that I should mention is that when it comes to SSRF and exploiting it, it almost always comes down to the vulnerability itself as far as how you exploit it. So this exploit here will only really work for this specific case of the vulnerability. However, if you understand the underlying concepts, you can easily write your own exploit script for your needs. So this will definitely be useful from a conceptual point of view here. Now, you see on this website here, port 60,000, we have this private web browser here, and it'll let us search for different things, whatever we want to search for. But we can also use it to access ports on the local host. So if I come here and I say, for example, port 22 of the loopback address, we see that we're able to hit that port, and it is in fact open. It gives us this banner message back. Now, in this case, protocol mismatch, a bit of an error message, but we can see here that clearly SSH is open on the box. So we could try some of the other ones we normally know exist on the local host, like a MySQL service, and we see that is present as well. So what we can do is, this is a very manual process, how we're doing it right now, right? Typing in the port that we want to search for. Instead, we can automate this server-side request forgery. And the reason this is server-side request forgery is we shouldn't be able to use this to port scan the local host, obviously. So here we could, if there were other servers on the local network and we wanted to scan those, we could do that. Now, in the case of this CTF box, there isn't a whole network to play around with, but that's another use case for this vulnerability. Say we knew of some other local IP addresses on the network. Well, we could say we can't hit them from our box because we're external or whatever. We can actually go through this server to make requests to the other server and see what ports are open. And in some cases, you can actually get other data and other things through this vulnerability as well. So keep that in mind. But in this case, we are going to write a script to exploit this SSRF. So I'm going to use the Python requests library. And there's something going on with my pilot where it's going to give a little red squiggly under this, but I do have requests available to use. Let's set the variable for the URL. In this case, we will grab this. Now, if we put back in our example here, say port 22, we can see that it came up with this full thing. I'm just going to grab up to this point, and I'm going to copy that, and I'll place that into the URL variable, and you'll see why here in a second. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a path variable. I'll be inside a for loop, though, so we're going to want to check all the ports. So let's just say for port in range from the number 1, we'll go from port 1 to 66536, which is basically going to go from 1 to 66535, as you'll see here. Let's just test this to make sure this works. We'll just say, hey, let's just print port, right? So we'll just do this as a way of testing it. And there's that red squiggly I was talking about, but ignore that. So you see it will try all of these, right? That's what we want to do. Try 66535, right? So we will have it go ahead and try all of the ports. Now, next thing we can do, instead of saying print port, we can have it print the port, but we could also have it convert this to a string, right? Because this is going to be an integer by default, and we'll say to also, you know what? We'll do it as a string format, a format string here, and we will say port, just like that. And then once it's done doing that, what we'll do is also print off we'll have to check for the length, right? So let's see what the length is first. So we'll check the length. So we'll cast that into a string. And we'll say the length of the response. But first thing we have to do, right? We have to actually use request so that we can get the response to begin with. Kind of skip that step here. So let's just say that we have a path variable. And let me grab this, right? Or maybe, you know what, let's call this payload instead. Payload. And I will take all this. I'll add that up here, right? And the only part that's going to be different is this number here. So we'll say string port. And we can say full URL. Now, I wasn't really sure what to call this, but yeah, we'll say full URL is going to be equal to URL plus payload, right? And we can say full URL dot get request.get rather. Request.get full URL. And we'll be getting the text of that. That will be our data. And so now we'll just say, let's get the length of data and print it to the screen. Oh, sorry, this should be requests here. So you run that. And you see almost all of them are of length 2, so those are the ones we're going to want to ignore because there's nothing going on with those. Now, here, let's just kill this here. If you notice, right, 22 was open, right? We got some text back there. It was 62. So we'll just say, let's check if the length of data is not equal to 2. So, and I want you guys to really understand how I'm stepping through this. This is how I'm figuring out how to build my exploit, by running stuff like this to kind of step through and see what's going on first so I know how to write this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that if the length of data is not equal to 2, then I'll print port and then I'll print the actual data itself. So yeah, obviously it's going to take a long time to run 66535 like all ports. But what we could do is we could write this as a multi-threaded application. Now you see here, there is the hit on port 22, and we see the text here. We're like, okay, it's open. Alternatively, instead of printing data, we could just say port is open or something like that, right? And just step through it that way. I'm not going to wait for this whole thing to complete because it's going to take quite a long time. You see port 90 is also open, and so on and so forth, right? There's an HTML page here. So another thing we could do, right, I mean, in a more practical sense, if we want to write something like this and then just kind of AFK while we let it run, there might be a lot of results back. We could actually write this to a file instead. So we could say with open, and let me try to remember how to do this myself here. I always have to Google the specific syntax for this. So you can say with open and then a file SSRF.text, we'll call it. And we'll open that in append mode. And we'll say as F. So if the length is not equal to 2, instead of printing to the screen, we'll just say f.write and f.write. Now, the difference between write and print is actually it doesn't automatically append that new line. So we're just going to put the new line here, right? And yeah, it should be good to go there. So let's try this. Now, again, I'm not going to wait for the whole thing to complete because that's going to take forever. But probably a better way to write this is to use some multi-threading. That way it can check multiple ports at once. Now, Python, there are some limitations to multi-threading and how it doesn't really make the program much faster because of the global interpreter lock. So that is a bit unfortunate for us. So I'm not going to really go into like the whole multi-threading part of this. But as a proof of concept, you get the general idea of, hey, this is how we write at least a quick and dirty exploit for our SSRF. Of course, there's always ways to clean up the code and make it better, right? So if I kill this here, what I should be able to do is open this SSRF.txt, and we see a number of ports that are open. We see all the data here. This is really useful if you're running it on all ports because you might potentially get a lot of hits back, and maybe your terminal is set to only show a certain number of lines back, and you can't go all the way back, and you just lost a lot of your results. That's annoying, right? Another thing we can do, of course, is just add in the print statements as well, so we can have it print to the screen and write to the file. That's something we could do. But yeah, hopefully getting your creative juices flowing with this stuff here and showing you just how powerful having a good understanding of Python can be, how useful it is. There's a reason why this is so widely used by pen testers and even people outside the space. It is, I believe, one of the most, if not the most used programming language out there right now, and it's because of write speed. You saw how quickly I just wrote this up. That is the power of the Python programming language. So hopefully you learned something in this video. If so, definitely hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want to learn more about Python, well, I have the perfect series for you, Black Hat Python. We'll be creating another video for that series pretty soon, and we've just been doing all kinds of exploitation stuff for it, to the point that, hey, it got me to start thinking of some things that I could go off script, outside of the book, and create myself. So yeah, definitely want to see you guys right over there at this time. I'll see you guys in those videos. Thanks for watching.